In Africa, yes, because there is a policy of the American government. It's called the Kissinger Report, which was produced in the mid-70s when Henry Kissinger was involved with the government. And it explicitly states, which to this day, it remains the official policy of the American government. It has not changed. It may not be implemented by Trump, but it remains the same. That the purpose of the foreign policy in Africa was to reduce the population. So to give aid to countries in Africa.
What if I told you a declassified U.S. report from 1974 predicted the world we are living in right now? You know, the United States has produced a lot of classified and, let's be honest, pretty controversial documents over the years. And for decades, many of them were kept completely out of public reach. But after a while, those files started getting declassified. And now, anyone interested in geopolitics can actually read them. Most of these documents focus on U.S. foreign policy, and when you dig into them, they reveal a side of world history and politics that wasn't exactly meant for public eyes. And one of the most talked about and controversial examples of that is something called the Kissinger Report. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly is this report about? So officially, this report is known as National Security Study Memorandum 200. And it was written back in 1974 under Henry Kissinger, who was the U.S. Secretary of State at the time. And the document was later declassified in the early 90s. In essence, this document looked at how fast population growth in third world countries, especially across Africa, Asia, and South America, could affect U.S. economic and political interests. The U.S. government's main concern in this report was that if these countries grew too quickly, they might become more self-reliant, less dependent, and harder to influence economically. The report actually listed 13 specific countries as priorities for population-related focus. And these countries are India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Indonesia, Thailand, the Philippines, Turkey, Nigeria, Egypt, Ethiopia, Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil. Now, these weren't just some random picks. Each of these nations had something in common, and that is strategic resources, fast-growing populations, and important geopolitical positions. And here is the core idea. Simply put, the Kissinger Report argued that managing population growth in resource-rich developing nations was important for maintaining global stability and, by extension, protecting U.S. interests.
In Africa, yes, because there is a policy of the American government. It's called the Kissinger Report, which was produced in the mid-70s when Henry Kissinger was involved with the government. And it explicitly states, which to this day, it remains the official policy of the American government. It has not changed. It may not be implemented by Trump, but it remains the same. That the purpose of the foreign policy in Africa was to reduce the population. So to give aid to countries in Africa, not clean water and schooling and things like that, but contraception and abortion, in order to shrink the population of Africa, because they have great mineral resources there.
That sounds diabolical.
It is, yes.
That sounds like something conceived in the mind of Margaret Sanger.
Yeah, definitely. And so at the time, Kissinger and those involved with the Carter administration wanted to shrink the population, make sure that the Africans do not develop and do not use the resources for themselves, because we in the States, we need them. There is a concerted effort of foreign powers to control the population of Africa. Africa is a huge continent, could feed thousands of more people, but the policies of the West, especially in Europe. For example, between 1990 and the year 2000, the United States, Canada, and Europe contributed about $6 billion in contraceptives, not to help the people, not to give clean water, clean food. That is
not to fight malaria, for example.
No, of course, perish the thought. Never let them die. That's the whole idea. So, in our work in HLI, we denounced this reality to make the Africans aware that they have to defend themselves against the influence of foreign powers.
Is it just the United States, or do you believe that China is also playing a role in jockeying for the resources of Africa?
China is playing a major role because China is buying property in Africa. For example, in Mozambique, which is a Portuguese-speaking language country, they when Portugal was in charge of Mozambique, they used to export rice. Now they are importing rice from China because they cannot produce. The socialism has wrecked the production of rice. And the Chinese come and buy farms. So about almost a third of Mozambique belongs to China. So I was in other countries of Africa, it's the same reality. In South Africa, the Chinese are buying property, buying land in Africa.
So
and they send their own workers, the Chinese workers. They don't employ people of the place. They send their own workers to populate and to live in the place.
And as a solution, it was recommended that the US government should use foreign aid, food programs, and healthcare initiatives to support voluntary family planning efforts in those countries. So instead of coming across as direct interference, it was presented as international development and cooperation. Now, depending on who you ask, this report means very different things. Some people see it as a strategic plan for promoting global balance and stability, while others believe it reflects a neo-colonial mindset, using population policy as a subtle form of influence. But here is where it gets interesting. Even though this report was written over 50 years ago, the themes it talks about, population growth, resources, and global power dynamics, still sound very familiar today. In fact, some critics say the idea from the Kissinger report still echo in modern foreign policy. But whenever the document comes up, officials usually say it's misunderstood or that the people take it out of historical context, since the document was written during the Cold War. And that's fair to say because context matters, right? But if you look around the world right now, you can't help but notice some striking parallels between what's in that document and the situations that we see playing out today. Let's take Venezuela, for example, or look at the ongoing crisis in Eastern Congo, or the instability across the Sahel region in Africa. All these areas are rich in natural resources and they have all faced years of political and economic instability. Now, I'm not saying that the Kissinger report caused these situations, but it definitely gives us a blueprint for understanding how global powers think about resources, population, and influence. That's why this report still matters. It's not just some dusty Cold War memo. It's a window into how major governments approach global strategy and how much of that thinking still shapes world politics today. And if you've never read or heard of it, I would highly recommend checking it out for yourself, because once you do, you'll start to see that much of what is happening in the world right now was already being discussed decades ago. Nearly 50 years later, the US is still playing out the same patterns outlined in our report. Maybe the real question isn't whether the Kissinger report shaped history, but how much of our present was already decided decades ago. Guys, thank you for stopping by. Give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more content. I'm out.